Welcome back to Michiana Main Lines. Today we have something really special again. We're going to dig in more to the South Bend to Niles rail line, a very popular subject here. We're pleased and privileged to have the entire slideshow presentation that David Corkhouse presented at the Northern Indiana Railway Society November 23 meeting. He's been kind enough to let us have it, and he's given us the all clear to do our own narration. So I will do my best to do that with my Polish and Hungarian accent. This has got a lot of new material in it. If you have a chance to ever see David Corkhouse's presentation live, he changes this up from time to time and makes additions. But if you've not seen it, you'll see stuff here today that isn't anywhere else. Even the previous videos, and we have quite a few on the channel from the Niles to South Bend line. This is new stuff. This isn't stuff we showed. A lot of the videos we do are kind of based more in the 80s and 90s time period. This is solidly in the late 70s, so there's a lot of Penn Central shots here that I've not seen before. So if you like South Bend to Niles or railroad history in general, you're going to love this. We're going to do it in several parts. This being part one, we'll start out with a history of the line a little bit, and then talk about the Niles area and just start a southward tour of the line all the way down to South Bend with pictures and stops along the way. So enjoy. We haven't added at all to any of the slides. This is strictly David's presentation. And it's really a personal story of his. He had a direct involvement with this line where he actually lived the rail fan's dream. He set up an unofficial station south of the Indiana state line called Palisades, where he would actually give train order information to the crews unofficially that really helped them in doing their job. And we'll hear all about that. It's really an incredible story. It's an interesting story. It's a fascinating story, and probably something that wouldn't even be possible in today's times. But we'll get more into that farther down in the presentation. We'll get into the history here a little bit. We don't want to get too bogged down because some of this gets a little bit hairy when you get into the early years of formation of not only this rail line, but also all of the area rail lines. But the airline is very important because that's basically what the foundation of the South Bend to Niles was, as we will see. But here's an old map that we want to just kind of look at to get our bearings. Now, this doesn't show all the rail lines. Grand Trunk is not on here. But just to get an idea here, of course, we have South Bend in northern Indiana and Niles in southwest Michigan. This is the line right here that we're going to be focusing on, Niles to South Bend. And I'll show another map that kind of digs in a little more to this south end of Niles to South Bend and South Bend, the South Bend area, because that gets a little complicated. But basically back here you had the Michigan Central, which came from Kalamazoo and then over through Michigan City. You had what was the airline. You'll be seeing that name a lot. Well, this was the airline that came from Three Rivers to Niles. And that, of course, is gone now. The Michigan Central is now Amtrak. And you'll also be hearing about the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern, which is the main line across Indiana, now NS. But that, of course, was New York Central and Penn Central. So that kind of is what the area consisted of. Early dates in railroad history. Again, a lot of this stuff is in the early years. Buffalo and Mississippi Railroad building west out of New York. All of the rail lines were trying to reach Chicago. That was the name of the game. And there was a lot of activity in this area. Judge Stanfield was a judge that was instrumental in a lot of the local rail building here. And of course, Michigan Southern and Northern Indiana was a very famous early railroad. And financial troubles hit many of them. This was a very very rough period, very dynamic. Charters would be issued to build a railroad. Sometimes they would start, sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes they'd run out of money and then the charter would be turned over to somebody else and they would start building. So there was a lot going on, a lot of different names here. 1851, first train of the Michigan Southern and Northern Indiana reached South Bend, and name changed to Lakeshore and Michigan Southern. That again is the main line across northern Indiana. It was referred to as the Lakeshore at that time, but historically Lakeshore and Michigan Southern is what that was called. And of course that's the NS now. Here we see the Grand Trunk was also building in southwest Michigan, and they were instrumental in the Michigan Airline. But then ultimately the Michigan Central took over the Michigan Airline. And the main thing to remember is that the Michigan Airline is what actually built the Niles to South Bend line using the charter of the St. Joe Valley Railroad. And some more here of Judge Stanfield. Again, his charter of the St. Joe Valley is what was used then to build the Niles to South Bend. Here it shows 1870. Springtime, the line began operations. But now some of the history show that it's 1872. And it depends what history you read, because again, there was so many different dates when it came to the formation of a railroad. A charter date of construction starting again if someone else took over, completion, actual first run. So many times those dates get to be interchangeable after a while, and you really don't know what you're dealing with. 1870, Judge Stanfield leased the St. Joe Valley to the Michigan Airline. Again, the charter was used. And then in 1916, the Michigan Airline merged with Michigan Central. Historically, the Niles to South Bend was usually agreed to be considered Michigan Central. That's usually what everybody called it. But New York Central, when they took over, they also either owned or managed it for quite a long time too. So between Michigan Central and New York Central, those are really the two historical railroads that really were the Niles to South Bend. Now here's another map I want to take a look at here, just to kind of get in a little deeper to the south part of Niles to South Bend, because again we said it was primarily a Michigan Central line. Well, we see here coming down out of Niles and into South Bend, kind of into South Bend itself. This pretty much is considered the Michigan Central. And we'll see in some of the slides coming up where even in the late 70s time period, there was business here in South Bend, namely Rose Fuel and Materials, which was located somewhere down in this area. We'll talk about that a little more later. But what I really want to focus on is this side of the branch you see here. This is also considered South Bend to Niles, and probably more importantly so, because this is what actually connected the Michigan Central to the New York Central in two places. The main line through town, which is now NS, and also the New York Central on the south side of town, which was the Kankakee Belt, later the NIPSCO branch. And that, of course, that now is just basically a yard lead to reach the industries on the south side of South Bend. But it also crossed the Grand Trunk over there too. And now this came along later, this connection. This was built in 1905. And right in this area here, kind of near the Drury's Brewery, or the probably closer to the Portage Avenue overpass, was a division point. And actually it separated Michigan Central ownership from New York Central ownership early on when it was built. But then that location became an important division point even through New York Central and even into Penn Central, where it separated the Michigan division from the Chicago division. And so that changed the way things were operated. Crews could not cross that boundary or had to be escorted, and various special things happened because of that division point. So we'll hear more about that in coming slides as well. Here's some old memorabilia. This was Michigan Central Railroad, July 31st, 1914. That was a train order, basically giving permission from 7:15 to 9:30 a.m. between Niles and South Bend. Some interesting history there. Now we'll start looking around a town of Niles a little bit, where the line starts. That's the kind of famous Niles Depot. That's a very interesting structure. It's been in a lot of movies. Basically what we're looking at here, this was the old Michigan Central, now Amtrak line, and you can see what was a big yard at that time in Niles with all the freight cars. Another picture here of the structure. Very, very cool structure, really. Very interesting. So here we'll take a little bit of a diversion with some memorabilia, which is a mileage chart and timetable of the airline on the left, where you kind of see the mileages there of the old airline from Jackson to Niles, starting at milepost 0 and ending at 104.8. On the right is kind of interesting. That's the South Haven branch. If any of you are bike riders, or even if not, you might have heard of the Cal Haven Trail, which is a very popular bike trail. Well, this is the rail line that it used to be. And you see the towns there, Kalamazoo, Mentha, which was a very important peppermint producing location in Michigan, if not the entire U.S., and Grand Junction, where it crossed the Pierre Marquette, today crosses the CSX, and of course South Haven. Some more dates here now. 1937, Michigan Central became New York Central. As we said, the line was New York Central for quite a long time, probably almost as much as Michigan Central. And then 1969, New York Central became Penn Central. 76, Conrail. And then 1981, April 25th, the last run. Now we need to make clear when we're talking about this 1981, the last run, that pretty much is talking about the last run of any through traffic and kind of the main central portion of South Bend to Niles, because the north portion, basically north of Highway 12, including all the street running in Niles, that continued to almost the year 2000. Conrail still operated that to reach the French paper mill. And the south side in South Bend, the MC connector that we just discussed, that was used by Conrail to reach Notre Dame and also some other businesses on the north side of South Bend, and that was operated well into the 90s. So that 81 is basically the bulk of South Bend to Niles, but not all of it. Okay, some more important dates here when it comes to the Niles area. 1955 to 1960, New York Central consolidated the Niles yard into the new Elkhart yard. Now that was not a popular thing when it happened. There was a lot of protests. There was even violence, and even a murder resulted from it. It was not taken well at all. But it happened. They decided to consolidate Niles into Elkhart, but they needed to then come up with a way to get the traffic or the cars from Niles to Elkhart. So that's when the transfer was born. And that transfer is what we're going to kind of be following a train in pictures south from Niles all the way to South Bend. And that transfer was symboled NSB1 for Niles to South Bend, and it ran daily except Sunday. And then the return counterpart, SBN2, which also ran daily except Sunday. Some more memorabilia here, a New York Central System clearance form. This was dated November 16th of 1968. And this was an order for a train. Michigan Central Niles Yard, mostly abandoned in 1960, and we'll see pictures of that here. Turntable and water tower, Niles Yard, 1965. Here's a picture of that water tower. Picture here of that turntable in 1965. Another picture here of the turntable and the number of stalls that it had. Now, part of this turntable is still preserved. In Niles, I believe it's owned by a private business which now occupies that property. East end of Niles Hump Yard in 1974. Really hard to believe there was ever a big yard there with humps. It pretty much just looks like it was some rural junction someplace in the plains or something like that. Look there at the lead to the hump. Then we had the Penn Central takeover of New York Central and Pennsylvania railroads in February of 1968. That brought more changes to Niles to South Bend. There we see a Penn Central locomotive, probably the transfer being assembled. Amazing looking at all that empty space of what was once a big, bustling, active yard. And I mean, you can just see it's only just a former shell of what it used to be. Here again, we see the transfer getting ready to head towards South Bend. You can kind of notice this car here with some yellow equipment on it, a front end loader or some such equipment. That would have been from the Clark Equipment Company in Buchanan, Michigan. Now let's look closer at what kind of traffic was hauled on the transfer from South Bend to Niles. We had foundry sand out of Michigan City. Again, Clark Equipment in Buchanan. We just saw that car. Coal for Notre Dame and St. Mary's. Newsprint paper for the South Bend Tribune. Brick and building supplies for that Rose Fuel and Materials we looked at on that South Bend map a while ago. Lumber for Big C and Roseland, just north of South Bend. Oil petroleum products. Wire and pipe, maybe for Ristance Wire, which had a spur off of the street running in Niles, and fruit for various locations. 1974 Penn Central Niles transfer, South Bend transfer. We'll start looking at the transfer a little closer here. There it is, Penn Central locomotive in the lead. Hot summer day with dust being kicked up, getting ready to leave the yard area. Another look at the yard. Jordan spreader used year-round for snow and weed control. Here's a look at that here, and we'll see another shot of one of those working on the line further south. Other trains that kind of ran through the Niles area: Penn Central, Daly, Jackson, Kalamazoo to Niles, a local freight in 1974. Also served Matawan, Lawton, Dowagiac, and Kalamazoo. That would have kind of been the early version of Conrail's WDKZ1, which came into Niles from Kalamazoo, also working Dowagiac. Shot here probably of one of those trains in the Niles area. Now, southbound cars. Cars basically coming southbound, a lot from the nickel plate and Monon. What happened at that time was, say there were loads in Michigan City off of those lines and needed to get to Elkhart. They would take the ex-Michigan Central up to Niles, then the transfer on the South Bend, Niles to South Bend, south to South Bend, and from there the local in South Bend would take them to Elkhart. Now that would take about a week. Now you can kind of see that doesn't sound very efficient, and that's kind of one of the reasons why the New York Central and even the Penn Central were having some of the financial problems that they did. Well, that's one of the things Conrail did when they came along, was do away with all of those kind of efficiencies. Also, there was traffic from the Kalamazoo and Grand Rapids area, some from Detroit and Toledo, and the GR&I traffic. Northbound were pretty much those empty returns, loads for Kalamazoo, and again we see the Clark equipment in Buchanan, which was probably a fairly big shipper. Then February 21st, Conrail took over the Penn Central. That was in April Fool's. Actually, I think the start date was April Fool's Day, because that's usually the date that I would always use. But big changes when Conrail took over, and that probably is what put into motion of the demise of the South Bend to Niles line. But here we already see in the Niles yard how things were changing. On the right, a Conrail unit and full Conrail paint, and on the left, a Penn Central unit that has just got the CR stencil awaiting its final paint. Occasional through Chicago-Jackson moves also utilize the South Bend to Niles in the late 70s. If there was track work maybe, or even a derailment on the Niles to Michigan City line, some freight would take the South Bend secondary and use the South Bend to Niles. Here's a good winter shot in the Niles area, one of Indiana and Michigan's famous winters. Now, the trains that originated and operated in the Niles area in the 74 to 79 time period. There was a Niles, Michigan City in return that was called about 10 p.m. Niles Yard Job, which was called about 7 a.m. and Niles to Benton Harbor in return, which is called about 3 p.m. And we'll be talking a little bit about the Niles to Benton Harbor, because that's also a line that went out of Niles, the old Big Four, and that was still operated in the late 70s, and then that was removed in the early 80s, but it was still used a little bit at this time. And of course, our transfer, the Niles to South Bend in return, which was called about 4 p.m. Look here at the engine facility. This is across from the station in Niles. That area now is kind of an Amtrak maintenance facility of sorts. Another good shot there in the winter with plenty of snowpack from hitting snow drifts. Switch engine. There also occasionally was a special train on Saturday which would take coal from Niles down to the University of Notre Dame. Some more old documentation here, South Bend secondary track. Now, that's also what the Niles to South Bend was referred to as the South Bend secondary. And then for a while under Conrail, the parts of it were called the Niles industrial track. But the South Bend secondary is kind of what, even legally, Conrail referred to it as when it came to abandonment notices in the early 80s. This would be that part straight down into town that we looked at earlier, and of course the connector was still known as the MC connector. That's kind of what the legal definition still was of that. And this shows the mileages here from Niles Yard, 29.7, and Notre Dame 34.3, and then there you see that division post at 35.8. That's where we talked about that change in ownership near Drury's and the Portage overpass, where it separated the Michigan division from the Chicago division Western region. So our journey begins. We're going to start following a transfer from Niles to South Bend and look at different sites along the way. This was in 1977. Penn Central number 7815, one of the frequent locomotives used departing Niles Yard southbound for South Bend in 77. This location was called Lake Street Junction, location of the original Niles station. Here's that area there now. There was a station there at one time. Again, we see a Clark equipment load right behind the engine. That's, of course, is the ex-Michigan Central, now Amtrak main line, and this train was getting ready to make the curve and start heading south towards South Bend. Following pictures are during the Penn Central to Conrail era. Here's a shot after coming around the curve by the Simplicity Pattern Company in Niles on a nice snowy winter day, headed southward. They would be approaching Wayne and Howard streets, and then would be on the street running portion of the line. Another shot of that locomotive there from a different angle. I think this is a good place to conclude part one. Special thanks to all these people who in some part added to the production for David, be it pictures, graphs, charts, maps, or even just plain advice. Sometimes that goes a long way. We'll just leave you kind of here with a teaser for what will be coming up next. In part two, we're going to get into the street running pretty heavily, and then we will begin our journey southward towards South Bend with a lot of pictures at the various crossings in between. Once again, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, check out the other videos on South Bend to Niles if you're interested in it, and we'll see you next time. Take care.